We're back with another Final Cut update, and yes, it brings some big, very visible new features that you've probably already seen mentioned elsewhere. Things like Transcript Search, Visual Search, and the new beat detection tools are clearly the headline additions this time around. What I'm most interested in, though, are the details underneath, the small workflow changes, the quiet additions, and the bits of functionality that don't jump out immediately, but actually make a real difference once you start using them day to day. So in this video, I want to look at both. We'll cover the major new features, but we'll also spend some time on the less obvious improvements that are easy to miss and surprisingly useful once you know they're there. Which is why this isn't another one of those barely 10-minute videos. I'll leave Creator Studio out of this one for now and focus purely on what's new inside Final Cut and Motion. And as usual, I should briefly mention the updated system requirements for all three apps. You'll need macOS Sequoia version 15.6 or later, and even if you have an Intel machine that can run 15.6, you'll unfortunately only have access to the new beat detection feature. Transcript and Visual Search are Apple Silicon only. And just as a quick aside, I do have a separate video on how to update Final Cut safely that you can find up here or in the description. If you haven't watched that yet, I'd strongly recommend doing so before updating. Okay, before we jump into Transcript Search, let's take a quick look at a few smaller improvements. First off, when you launch Final Cut for the very first time, or when it can't find the library you last had open, it no longer automatically creates a new untitled library in your Movies folder with an event dated for today. Instead, you're presented with a completely empty interface featuring these new, very prominent purple buttons in the three main areas of the app. These are new in-app guides that walk you through creating a new library, importing media, and creating a new timeline. They explain what each section is for and what your next step should be. In the sidebar, for example, you'll see options to either create a new library or open an existing one. Only after you've done that do the other buttons become active, again guiding you through the next step, including additional tooltips when you hover over them. This is one of those very unspectacular changes that I personally really appreciate, mainly because it means my Movies folder will no longer slowly fill up with empty, untitled libraries that I periodically have to delete. Another small but useful addition is a new button at the top, just to the left of the Import button. Clicking this gives you quick access to the three most common sidebar-related commands. From here, you can create a new project in the selected event, a new event in the selected library, or an entirely new library altogether. Each command still has its usual keyboard shortcut, and of course, you can still find them in the File menu. This just saves you some mouse mileage. Lastly, there's also a free demo project you can download directly from the Final Cut Pro menu called Introducing Ali Sherlock. It includes interview recordings, a few multicam clips, B-roll, and even 2 finished example edits, a short 16-second music video, and a roughly 1.5-minute profile-style piece. More importantly, for our purposes, the project also comes with several smart collections that already demonstrate the new search features in action. So if you want ready-made material to experiment with, or just want to see how these new smart searches behave in a real project, this is a really useful sandbox to play around in. And with that, let's take a closer look at Transcript Search. This uses AI to automatically transcribe imported clips and allows you to search through spoken dialogue using natural language. Depending on whether you're importing new footage or working with an existing library, there are a couple of different ways to access this. Starting with new imports, if I click the Import button or simply press Command-I, the usual import window opens. If I scroll down in the sidebar to the Analyze Audio section, I can see a new checkbox labeled Transcribe in English. And yes, that wording already raises a red flag for anyone working in other languages, myself included. Just like Transcribe to Captions, this currently only supports English audio, which I find very unfortunate, and I really hope this changes soon. Hopefully that wording is already a hint at where this is headed. Transcribe in English very much sounds like something that wants to become a language pop-up at some point, or ideally an automatic language detection option. At least that would make a lot of sense. The option is enabled by default, but you can turn it off if you don't need it, or if you don't even have English audio to begin with. Doing so will also save you a few megabytes of unnecessary analysis data in your library. Since most of my own productions are in German, I'll be using some of my older English Final Cut tutorials for demonstration. I'll select them and hit Import. Once the clips are imported, opening the Background Tasks window shows Final Cut not only transcribing the audio, but also indexing it. That indexing step is what allows Transcript Search to work so quickly afterward. While that's running, I'll switch to an older library that contains voiceover audio which hasn't been transcribed, simply because this feature obviously didn't exist at the time. If I were to try to search here, nothing useful would show up aside from maybe clip names. So when opening an existing pre-version 12 library, it's necessary to manually analyze clips in order to use Transcript Search. To do that, I select one or more clips, then either go to the Modify menu and choose Analyze and Fix, or right-click a clip in the browser and select Analyze and Fix from the context menu. The Analyze and Fix window itself isn't new, but below the familiar options we now see the same Transcribe in English checkbox. This is how you enable transcription for older projects or for clips that weren't transcribed on import. In this case, I don't actually need the analysis, so I'll cancel out here. This is just to show where the option lives when needed. While that analysis would normally run in the background, my other library is already fully transcribed and indexed, so I'll switch back to that and we'll take a look at it there. And just to avoid any confusion, this isn't text-based editing. The transcription is used purely as searchable metadata. For actual text-based editing, you'll still need a third-party solution, such as Lumberjack Builder or Descript, because Final Cut doesn't offer that yet. To use Transcript Search, I open the search bar by clicking the magnifying glass at the top right, if it's not already visible. Then I click the magnifying glass on the left side of the search field to open the Search Options menu. By default, the search category is set to All. When the field is empty, Final Cut spells out exactly what that means right here in the search bar. It searches text, spoken words, and visual objects all at the same time. If I switch the category to Transcript and choose Includes, the icon changes and the placeholder updates to Search for Spoken Words, which is a nice visual confirmation that we're now limiting the search to dialogue only. Now I'll enter Adjustment Clip as my search term. That gives me 27 matching clips. Playing a few of them, clip. So in this case, the adjustment clip with its previous color correction to show the best. The timecode adjustment clip never goes away because it is not connected to functionality. Let me know what you think of the adjustment clips, or even confirms that the results are exactly what I'd expect, especially since all of these clips come from my Final Cut 11.1 update video. What's especially helpful here is that Final Cut doesn't jump to just the exact word or phrase. Instead, it selects the entire sentence or consecutive sentences where the term appears, with a bit of context on either side. That way you get the full thought and flow, instead of landing in the middle of a sentence and having to rewind for context. At this point, I could switch to List View to see the new relevance column, where Final Cut marks these results as exact. Conceptually, you can think of this as Final Cut's confidence in its own matches. Exact means it's very sure, while lower ratings indicate increasing uncertainty. What's especially useful, though, is that you don't actually have to switch to List View to work with this. If I switch back to Film Strip View and look in the Clip Appearance and Filtering menu above the browser, there are now options to group and sort results by relevance right here without leaving Film Strip View. This means you don't actually have to switch to List View, as I've seen suggested elsewhere, just to work with relevance. If I group by relevance, Final Cut organizes the results into collapsible confidence buckets, keeping the most certain matches together while the less certain ones remain visible and clearly labeled. So, if I'm not interested in lower rated clips, I can simply collapse those sections to hide them from view. Nice! Now let's compare that to the second option, is related to. Switching to this increases the number of results significantly. Sorting by relevance shows many results rated low, some high, but notably no exact matches. And honestly, clips from videos prior to version 11.1 can't really be related to adjustment clips in the way they exist today, because the feature simply didn't exist yet. What Final Cut seems to be doing with is related to isn't phrase matching at all, but conceptual clustering. It's treating adjustment clip less as a single term and more as two semantic ideas, adjustment and clip. Skimming through just a few of these 10.8 results, and I'll play one or two here as examples. And now I can just drag my other clip or clips onto the droplet and step through the clip as before, neutralized. After applying it, I can make further manual adjustments using the color adjustment effect. For pixels, I'll set the frame size to automatic. It's mostly picking up moments where I'm talking about adjustments in a broader sense. Manual tweaks, clip changes, quality adjustments, retiming, parameters changing over time. From a human perspective, those are absolutely related to the idea of adjusting clips. From a timeline history perspective, they simply predate the existence of the adjustment clip feature itself. And even beyond the higher relevance examples I'm showing here, Final Cut clearly grades the remaining results by relevance, which tells me it understands when it's making an educated guess rather than a precise match. This is definitely something I'll keep experimenting with. And if you've found particularly good or unexpected uses for is related to in your own projects, I'd genuinely love to hear about them in the comments. Switching back to includes, let's turn this into something reusable. Just like with any other search filter in Final Cut, I can click the small icon on the far right of the search field to open the search filter window. Since transcript, includes, and adjustment clip are my current criteria, all of these are already pre-filled as filter parameters. If I now click the New Smart Collection button at the bottom right, the window closes and a new Smart Keyword Collection is created in my event using those exact settings. I can name it Adjustment Clip, and from now on, just like with any other Smart Keyword Collection, any newly imported audio or video that contains adjustment clip as a spoken phrase will automatically appear here once it's been transcribed. Very powerful. Now here's a nice little detail. If I first select several of these results, then either clear an active search or, as in this case, simply exit the Smart Collection by clicking back on the event, Final Cut returns to the full clip view while keeping those selections intact on the original clips. That's a nice little workflow trick. From here I could favorite them, assign keywords, or simply press E to append just those moments directly to my project. And while we're on the subject, if I reopen the filter window and click the Add Filter menu, we can see that there's also a new Media Analysis filter option, which is easy to overlook but surprisingly useful. Instead of searching for content, this lets you filter clips based on what kind of analysis has actually been applied. Here I can specify whether I'm looking for transcript or visual analysis, and whether that analysis is available or missing. So, for example, I can quickly find clips that have been transcribed for spoken dialogue, clips that have been analyzed for visual objects, or just as importantly, clips that haven't been analyzed yet at all. This makes it very easy to sanity check a library and confirm that your import and analysis settings were applied consistently. Nice. So after Transcript Search, let's take a look at Visual Search. If I open the import window again, we can see a new Visual Search checkbox under the Video Analysis section. This is enabled by default, so media is automatically analyzed for visuals on import. And just like with Transcript Search, when opening or updating an existing library, it's necessary to manually analyze clips in order to use Visual Search. I'll select this first folder of footage and click Import All. Opening the Background Tasks window shows the visual analysis progressing. Since this takes a bit longer than transcription, I'll skip ahead. So now that it is finished, I can easily locate visual moments in my footage, including objects and actions, using natural language search. And to be totally honest, I've unfortunately found the search in this version to be rather inconsistent at times, so it's definitely not yet perfect. But more on that later. Once again, I can click on the magnifying glass menu on the left and select Visual. And let's just start with one of Apple's own examples from their website. I can enter climbing stairs. And as we can see already after just entering climbing, I get my first result of this gentleman, who I guess qualifies as climbing a mountain. Now if I add stairs, I'm given the result I'm actually looking for, a clip of someone walking down some stairs. So a great example of finding both an object and an action. One quick heads up for foreign language users. While Transcript Search is explicitly limited to English, as the Transcribe in English option already makes clear, Visual Search, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be strictly English only. Some non-English search terms do return results. From my own testing, however, English searches are clearly more reliable and generally produce better matches. So for now, searching in English is still the safest option. Another action search, running, returns the, as I happen to know, only clip I have of this woman running in place. Next, I'll try something broader and search for rain. Final Cut returns 6 results, and if I skim through the clips, we can see that there are a couple that don't quite fit the search term, such as this one with the fireworks, and another one with a hippopotamus, which is actually pretty hilarious. Just like with Transcript Search, Visual Search results are also assigned relevance ratings. And again, I can use the Browsers group and sort options to organize results by relevance, without even switching views. This makes it immediately obvious which results Final Cut is confident about, and which ones it's less sure of. Here we can see that Final Cut itself has low confidence in those particular clips compared to the others. If you prefer seeing this spelled out explicitly, the same relevance ratings are also visible as a column in list view. And again, just as with Transcript Search, I can click to open the filter window and have the parameters pre-selected for me, allowing me to create a smart keyword collection with a single click. I'll just name this one Rain. And just to show how useful this is, I'll right-click on the event and choose New Smart Collection. I'll name it Drone, and double-click it to open the filter window. At the top right, I can open the Add Filter menu and select Text. That might seem a little counterintuitive at first when we're setting up a visual search, but if you look at the menu, it actually makes sense. Final Cut treats both transcript and visual as additional text-based search scopes and simply adds them to the existing text filter alongside things like names, notes, and markers. So from here, I can choose Visual and then enter Drone into the text field. As soon as I do that, the Smart Collection is populated automatically. Even before I close the filter window, we can already see 5 clips that Final Cut believes to be drone shots. And in this case, it's actually doing a pretty good job, as we can see when I skim through them. Now I'll press Command I to reopen the import window and select a second folder full of footage. I'll let that import and analyze, and once that's finished, we can see that Final Cut has recognized additional drone and rain clips. I now have 10 instead of 5 drone clips and 8 instead of 6 rain clips in their respective smart collections. Very cool. Where inconsistencies unfortunately come up when using visual search is, for example, when I search for 2 women hugging. While this successfully returns 2 clips containing 2 women, even though they're actually hugging in only one of them, you may have noticed that nothing appeared until I entered the word hugging. In other words, deleting hugging and searching for the broader concept 2 women returns no results at all, despite the system demonstrably having detected that condition in the full query. If I undo that and then delete the term 2, I get a different result. An additional clip with 3 women, which I suppose one could argue are hugging. Most confusing of all, if I leave only women as the search term, I once again get no results at all. Even more confusing, if I change the plural women to the singular woman, I suddenly get the most results, including the 3 women, but not the 2. So the system clearly appears to recognize visual elements, but it only responds to very specific phrasing, while ignoring simpler or more general queries that should arguably be easier to satisfy. Here's one interesting edge case I ran into, and it's actually contrary to what I've heard and seen elsewhere so far. In one clip shot from inside a moving train, another train races by on the adjacent track. When I search for yellow tram, Final Cut doesn't just return the whole clip, it actually isolates just the short section where the yellow painted end of that passing train appears in frame at the end. That's the only case I've seen so far where Visual Search selects just a portion of a clip rather than the entire thing. It's still inconsistent, and notably doesn't happen if I search for yellow train instead, but it does show that the system is capable of more granular detection than it usually exposes. If that behavior becomes more consistent over time, it could make Visual Search significantly more powerful than it currently only teases it is. My conclusion is that in this first version of the feature, you should try different variations of your search terms to make sure you're seeing all relevant content. This feels less like a failure of detection and more like a mismatch between detection and query mapping. I would expect some fine-tuning in that department to be on the horizon. And last, but certainly not least, the big new feature addition to Final Cut Pro, beat detection. For me, this is definitely the most fun new feature. Gone are the days where if you wanted to edit your project to the beat of a piece of music, you first had to play it back in real time and hit the M key to set reference markers. And that's assuming you even had a decent sense of rhythm for it to be useful. You also had to decide whether to place markers per section, per bar, or even for every single beat. I usually did it for every beat just to keep my options open. But that took time, cluttered the timeline visually, and in the end still wasn't especially precise, often requiring further adjustment afterward. On top of that, there was no way to hide those markers when you didn't need them. And if you used multiple music tracks or multiple instances of the same track, you had to repeat the entire process every single time. The new beat detection feature allows you to intelligently analyze a song and reveal a beat grid so you can visualize and align either individual music tracks or even your edit itself to song parts, bars, and beats. Let's look at this in the context of a 30-second rough cut. I want to do two things here. I want to add music and adjust my current edit to the beat quickly and easily, and I also want to cut the music itself down to exactly 30 seconds. As you'll see, especially the second part is not only easy, but also extremely fast. Let's play through the first few of these songs. As you can hear, they're all pretty much the same tempo, but very different stylistically. I'll connect the second, slightly more energetic song in its entirety to the beginning of my timeline. And as usual, there are several ways to enable beat detection. I can go into the Clip menu, where roughly halfway down I'll find Enable Beat Detection, which uses the default shortcut Option B. And as I always mention in my update videos, if you're using a custom keyboard layout, you won't see any of these new shortcuts unless you assign them yourself or switch back to the default layout. Another option is to select it from the Clip Enhancement menu under the viewer. The last, and probably most convenient option, is to simply right-click the clip in the timeline and select Enable Beat Detection from here. Once I do that, a dialog box appears briefly, indicating that the clip is being analyzed. If you pay close attention to the far right of the center bar, the moment the analysis finishes and beat detection is enabled, a new toggle button appears just to the left of the toggle for the continuously scrolling timeline. It's represented by an icon that looks like a film strip with a music note. If this toggle is visible, that means the active project contains at least one clip with beat detection enabled. And here's a nice little bonus I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else yet. After the analysis, if you open the audio inspector for the music clip, you can also activate or deactivate beat detection from here. But the real gem is that Final Cut actually shows you the detected tempo in beats per minute. You don't need this for beat detection itself, but it's surprisingly useful when you want to compare or match different tracks. Once again, very cool. With beat detection enabled, the music clip now displays a vertical grid that visualizes the parts, bars, and individual beats of the song. Whether I see all three depends on my zoom level. When zoomed in far enough, parts are represented by thick lines highlighting major structural changes in the music, bars, also called measures, by thin lines, and beats by dotted lines. As I zoom out, these lines disappear in stages until only the part indicators remain. Which is great, because otherwise the timeline would become extremely cluttered. In addition, with snapping enabled, Final Cut displays 3 music style icons when I hover over any of the detected rhythm markers with the skimmer. The plain note with the little sparkles marks parts, the single flag note marks bars, and the double flag note marks beats. Think of these as 3 zoom levels of rhythm. These icons are of course just symbolic. They don't represent actual musical note values. They simply indicate the 3 different rhythmic levels detected in the clip. And again, with snapping enabled, dragging an edit point, such as the out point, snaps it directly to the grid lines. Dragging the clip itself left or right also snaps the grid lines to edit points in the timeline. There are 2 ways to turn the beat detection grid on and off. You can disable it on a per-clip basis by selecting a clip and pressing Option B again. With that, the grid is disabled for this one clip. And if this was the last clip in the project using beat detection, the toggle button disappears as well, which I think is yet another great way of keeping the interface uncluttered. If I want to keep beat detection enabled, but temporarily hide the grid for all clips in the timeline, I can simply re-enable beat detection on a clip so the toggle reappears, and then use that toggle. And if I hover over it with my mouse, the tooltip shows that the shortcut for this is the 0 key. So how can we use this to cut the music down to fit a 30-second edit? To demonstrate how fast this is, I'll first put the music clip into its own secondary storyline by pressing Command G, which also gives it its own little magnetic timeline. If I listen to the first part of the music, we can hear that it's a fairly atmospheric intro that doesn't really fit my much more dynamic content. In fact, if I listen to the second and third parts identified by Final Cut, I'll notice that the track doesn't really take off until the 4th part. So without even listening further, I'll skim directly to the 4th part indicator, which is also confirmed by the small icon that appears when the skimmer snaps to it, and press Command B to make an edit. I can now delete the entire first section. Since the remaining section is still too long, I'll skim to the next part indicator, then to the second to last part indicator, pressing Command B each time, and delete the entire middle section. In just a few seconds, I'm already much closer to my required 30-second length. Now I can zoom in far enough to see the full detail of the grid. All I need to do is drag the out point of the first section, or the in point of the second section, snapping them to the appropriate bar indicators while watching the end of my timeline so the final part indicator lines up with my last edit. I'll shorten the end to meet the 30-second limit and drag out the fade handle so it doesn't cut off abruptly. Done. Let's listen to the edit points. Sounds pretty good to me. And even if I don't like the transition point in the middle, for example, I can very quickly experiment with alternatives by selecting the trim tool and sliding the edit left or right, snapping it to a different bar indicator. I can be confident the transition will still feel musical. This is a really elegant implementation and possibly the best I've seen of this kind of feature. And of course, everything we've just done with the music applies just as much to the video edit itself. With snapping enabled, I can trim, roll, or move video clips so their edit points snap directly to parts, bars, or beats in the grid. That makes it incredibly easy to align visual cuts, transitions, or accent moments precisely to the rhythm of the music without any guesswork or manual markers. Just to show another example of how useful and fast beat detection is, I'll take these 4 music clips and edit them down into a single seamless track. Notice that while the first 3 are all around 110 beats per minute, the 4th one is considerably slower at 83 beats per minute. I'll select all 4 clips and append them to the timeline with the E key, then enable beat detection on all of them using Option B. And now, instead of blading and deleting sections, I'll skim to 2-part indicators in each clip, set an in and out point, and use trim selection from the trim menu, or simply use the shortcut. On a US keyboard, that's Option \, but just use whatever shortcut Final Cut shows you here to keep that section. Doing this once per clip leaves me with exactly one musical part from each song, with far fewer clicks and no cleanup. Honestly, I don't see how I could have done this faster without the grid, even if I'd taken several minutes instead of seconds. The only real issue is the obvious speed difference between the last 2 clips, which makes that transition feel too abrupt. To fix this, I'll toggle the grid back on with the 0 key and zoom in a bit. I'll drag the slower clip underneath the previous one and line up their endpoints, knowing both are on a part marker. I'll select the slower clip and press Command R to open the retiming editor. Dragging the end of the clip to the left speeds it up, and as you can see, the beat detection grid scales perfectly to reflect the new tempo. Once the grids line up as closely as possible, I can close the retiming editor and move the clip back to the end of the timeline. Let's listen again. Much better. And once again, done in just a few seconds. And if you really want to earn some extra credit, you can blade the last clip a few seconds in with Command B, then move down the clip and hit Shift B about halfway through to add a speed blade. Unfortunately, as the warning tells us, variable speed retiming disables beat detection, but we don't need it anymore at this point, so I can click Continue. I'll select the second section of the speed blade, press Shift-N to reset it to 100% speed, and drag out the speed transition as far as possible. This is essentially the same technique DJs use, often called tempo riding, where the incoming track is temporarily sped up or slowed down to match what's already playing, and then eased back to its original tempo. Played back, the transition is seamless and the music naturally settles into its final speed. All of this takes well under a minute. Good stuff. And finally, Motion. Motion is still my favorite app on the planet after Final Cut. Unfortunately, it's once again only received a single new feature, but it's a good one. Motion now includes the magnetic mask that was introduced with Final Cut 11. If you're already familiar with the magnetic mask from Final Cut, there isn't a whole lot new to explain conceptually, but there are a few important differences in how it's accessed and how it behaves in Motion. First of all, the magnetic mask in Motion isn't applied as a filter or a behavior. To add it, I can select a clip and go to the Object menu, where about 3/4 of the way down I'll find Magnetic Mask. And as we can see, this can also be applied using the shortcut Option Shift Command M. Alternatively, I can right-click the clip in the Layers list and select it under the regular Image Mask option. The magnetic mask layer is added right away, and the new dedicated magnetic mask panel opens automatically in the inspector. I'll undo that. Last but not least, Motion version 6 adds a new dedicated magnetic mask button directly to the Canvas toolbar. And this will likely be the most natural and, frankly, obvious way to use the magnetic mask in practice. This button behaves a little differently from the other methods. Instead of immediately creating a magnetic mask layer, it switches me straight into object selection mode. As I move the eyedropper across the image, Motion shows a real-time overlay preview of the mask that would be created before I even click. This live preview behavior is something Final Cut doesn't currently offer, and it's incredibly helpful. Personally, I'd love to see this kind of preview persist even after the first selection, and I'd love to see the same behavior make its way into Final Cut as well. Once I click to make the selection, the magnetic mask layer is created. And if I have the HUD open, which I do recommend, I'll also see the most important controls directly in the canvas, saving some mouse mileage between the canvas and the inspector. With the magnetic mask layer selected, I'm in object selection mode by default, which turns the cursor into an eyedropper over the canvas. And as you may already know from Final Cut, and possibly from my earlier magnetic mask video, holding the Option key while using the eyedropper lets me subtract from the selection instead of adding to it, switching the cursor from a plus to a minus. That same behavior applies here in motion and makes refining the mask much faster. After making an initial selection, I can switch to Show Results mode to preview the mask. Change the blend mode, invert it, or adjust the feather. The main difference compared to Final Cut shows up once I start refining the mask further using the touch-up brushes. So I'll switch back to object selection mode and add a quick brush stroke to extend the mask slightly. And by the way, holding the Command key while clicking and dragging lets me dynamically change the brush size, which is slightly odd, since in Final Cut you use the Shift key for the same thing, but okay. Now that I've added a brush stroke, the Apply Brushes option becomes relevant. Here I can choose between Before Feather and After Feather, which determines how those brush strokes are treated. If this is set to Before Feather, adjusting the feather affects both the main mask and the brush strokes equally. If I switch it to After Feather, the feather applies only to the main mask, leaving the brush strokes with a hard edge. While this is generally clever and potentially useful, I'm still not entirely convinced of its practical value. The main reason is that this distinction disappears as soon as you analyze even a single frame. At that point, both the main mask and any brush strokes are feathered equally by the value set in the feather slider. So if you have a practical, real-world use case for this distinction that I might be missing, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want to deep dive into the magnetic mask in general, along with a bunch of tips and tricks, I've already made a comprehensive video on the subject. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So that's a first look at what's new in Final Cut Pro 12. Some genuinely powerful additions, a few rough edges, and a couple of features that are clearly just getting started. There's a lot here that's already useful today, and just as much that feels like it's laying the groundwork for what's coming next. If this video was useful, great. And if you're feeling generous, you'll find various little buttons below that YouTube insists on putting there. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.